Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. I am Dana Litwin, and this week I'm very excited to talk about some new research by Points of Light. And this builds on research that I've previously talked about a few years ago with the Initiative for Strategic Volunteer Engagement, that research is now housed with Independent Sector. And if you are going to be at the Points of Light conference in early June in New Orleans, please come to my session on June 5th. And I'll have much more information and details, including where my session is and the full 37-page report that I'm referring to. But let's just get to some of the highlights real quick for your Tuesday tips. So this is a report called From Nice to Necessary, Unleashing the Impact of Volunteering Through Transformative Investment. And again, I'm very, very glad that this builds on the research that I've previously been tangentially involved with organizations doing this type of research on investing in strategic volunteer engagement and volunteer services overall. The report from Points of Light is informed with research conducted by the Bridgespan Group, a global nonprofit advisory firm, and focused on the U.S. It uses information from interviews, focus groups, and data analysis to examine the impact of volunteers, the cost of effectively recruiting and deploying them, and their potential, both met and unmet, for building a better society. It looks at how volunteerism is understood, valued, and funded, or in this case, in a cycle of being underfunded. We'll talk about that more in a second. The impact of volunteers is enormous, but hasn't been sufficiently quantified. There is not a lot of research and data on this, or the types of research that have been done previous to the last few years have been really kind of only measuring number of bodies and number of hours, and there's been less research or not enough research on really quantifying the mission impact for nonprofits or government agencies utilizing volunteers. And we know that volunteering drives social impact at the individual, community, and societal levels, but we just haven't studied enough of its effects or documented. And one of the reasons is that nonprofits themselves often lack the technological resources or programs or software or platforms to create the data. They maybe don't know what to measure, how to measure it, or they simply can't afford the technology and the tools to measure it. So that's a big barrier to getting enough information. The full cost of volunteer engagement, like effectively recruiting, training, deploying, recognizing, and retaining volunteers, hasn't been sufficiently quantified or studied either. And effective volunteer engagement is, as we know, a complex process and requires substantial resources and collaboration across multiple stakeholders. There's an estimate that ranged from $136 to $2,000 of spending per volunteer in these budgets that were within the studies. And as we know, that's not a lot of money, indicating both a lack of precision and the variation in what resources may be required across different organizations and types of volunteering. And that information came from interviewing 20 organizations. So that's really just a small sample, but it shows how widespread the lack of tools or technology or data gathering is to even get to these conclusions in a scientific way. There's limited impact, and cost data fuels a lack of alignment between nonprofits and funders. And this is what was discovered with the Initiative for Strategic Volunteer Engagement, that funders think that volunteer engagement is included in the overall programmatic stuff that they tend to fund. They usually don't earmark or are not usually specific about this goes to volunteer services or volunteer engagement. So when an organization gets this, they may put that money someplace completely different, or it might be too earmarked to be very specific to programmatic costs and not general costs or general overhead or something that volunteer engagement could fall within. And that limited data by funders and to funders, if you don't ask, you don't get. So part of what we discovered with earlier research that this Points of Light research reinforces is that if you have the capacity in your organization, like you have a volunteer management software system or some other CRM type database or tracking software of volunteer and donor activities, you can build a case that's data driven about the mission impact if you know what to measure and how to measure it. And I talk about that in other videos as well. But most organizations, they're just not doing it. We know as leaders of volunteers, a lot of leadership, a lot of organizations are barely aware of the value of volunteers at all, or if anything, it is just the independent sector average of what their labor is worth per hour type thing, which is just really the bare minimum floor of any calculation that should be done. So limited data makes it harder for nonprofit leaders to articulate the specific costs and benefits of strategic volunteer engagement. So to break the cycle of underinvestment, it requires a long-term commitment by a range of stakeholders under a shared vision that redefines volunteering not as some mysterious, intangible, woo-woo, nice-to-have thing, but rather as a resource-intensive, powerful, measurable force for driving social impact. And we know that's true, but it's great that a global research group has discovered that as well. And it's great that an organization with the size and scope and audience of Points of Light is helping to amplify this very, very necessary and important message. Here are a few recommendations that you can take. Better data. With the impact on the individual volunteer is well explored and documented, we need to do more to quantify and document volunteerism's broader impact on communities and society. That's especially challenging right now in the current nonprofit and attacks and lack of funding and support for nonprofits in the USA. I've talked about that as well. And the kind of research that this is and can be built on more could provide vital information about the role of volunteers in helping achieve the outcomes that align both with nonprofits and funders' strategic priorities. So what isn't counted doesn't count, and you can't measure everything, so there has to be a plan that everybody's in on with a shared vision on how to get the data and communicate it. Stronger infrastructure, like I talked about at the beginning of the video, there's just not enough tools or technology and often know-how, and there just needs to be more resources and ideally standardized tools to help nonprofits and intermediaries and funders more accurately and consistently assess the full financial investment required for effective volunteer engagement. Data and analysis developed through the use of this more robust infrastructure and technology or tools can also help funders better understand the costs of achieving the outcomes they seek. The third main suggestion highlighted from, again, this 37-page report, I really encourage you to read the entire thing and the methodology. I find that kind of stuff super interesting. I'm fun and wonky that way. But the third suggestion is just, hey, what we're doing, more dialogue, get the word out, share this information. We can use this impact and cost data to encourage dialogue and develop that alignment between funders and nonprofits about the role of volunteers in driving social outcomes. These kinds of conversations can only be healthy and good for our sector, furthering understanding and driving action that strengthens the capacity of nonprofits to recruit and deploy volunteers to carry out critically important jobs. Now, a few statistics you may have heard. About 1/3 of the nonprofit workforce is comprised of volunteers. Yes, and at any given moment, the data shows that only about 50% nationally in the US of volunteer shifts are ever filled on average. So great. Maybe a humane society here is doing a great job and has all their shifts filled. Maybe a Meals on Wheels or a food bank somewhere else, has 10% of shifts filled. So it's an average of about, we could do with, twice as many volunteers as are currently engaged. So expanding support for high quality volunteer engagement can contribute to a world where nonprofit organizations provide a range of essential services at scale to those who need it. It also helps communities rebuild trust and reduce inequality and spur society towards positive change. So please spread the word. Read the full report below. Come see me on June 5th at Points of Light for my session, Rainbow Washing, Engaging LGBTQIA Volunteers. And I hope you have a great rest of the week. Take care. We'll see you next time.